Okay, so Gil gave you the rundown on what we know about the market and how we find out where people live and what kind of people are buying. And in this background, I'm going to focus on the effect of pricing because we found this to be the single most important determinant of how many chargers you need to plan for. And it'll become clear as we go through the presentation. And this is one of the things we've built into the tool, not just how many do you need, but at what price. So just to kind of keep everyone on track, I'm going to give you the answers first so you know what to look for in the presentation, or you can go to sleep after this, since you know all the answers. But one of the things that's happening in California is that congestion is occurring, and what that means is that people are not able to charge every day that they would like to charge. So that means you need to either increase the number of chargers or, in some cases, have better charger management. You could have shorter time periods, make sure that people are moving their car when they're full, or you could do something like pricing. So when we looked at pricing, we found that free charging will be used about 4 times more than paid charging. And so what that means is that if you have free chargers everywhere, you'll need to install a lot more chargers. So you can build your way out of the problem to make congestion go away, or you can manage the charging different ways. And also, one of the unintended effects is that free charging discourages people from going past their range, and we see this both in the survey and in some real data, which I'll show you, is that if people are not sure that they can get back, they won't even attempt the trip. And so when you have free charging where people, maybe somebody who doesn't need a charger, they get there in the morning, they need maybe a half hour of charge, they sit there for 8 hours, and that means you can't use the charging for anyone else. So paid charging results in shorter sessions and more availability. This is just some of the research results. However, there's different ways to charge for electricity. Charging by hour means that you have to have a car that can pull down the electricity at a certain rate. So it's very popular to charge maybe $1 an hour, but this only makes sense for a BEV, which can pull it down at 6.6 kilowatts, meaning something like a 15 cent per kilowatt hour, 15 to 18 cents. I guess I should do the division there, but that's a pretty good price compared to gas, a gasoline alternative at 15 to 18 cents. But if you have a car that's PHEV, it can only pull it down at 3.3 kilowatts, which is half the rate, and that means effectively that you double your cost per kilowatt hour, and you should never plug in at $1 an hour if you have a Volt or a plug-in Prius. At least it doesn't make economic sense. And so just charging is not the whole story. It's how you charge by hour or by kilowatt hour, and there's some results I'll show you exactly what happens when you do that. And again, at the bottom, charging by kilowatt hour is more fair to PHEVs. So, as Gil said, we did a 11 states plus DC survey, and we also did a California survey. And I'm just going to tell you what the landscape looks like with charging at work. This is often cited as it's probably the easiest way to look at look at public charging because it's the most applicable. Is the workplace. And so we'll look at the state of charging, including congestion, and then what are people paying? Are people paying, or is it all free? And then what do people say about price on usage, and some in-use data. So why are people providing charging at work? And if you ask somebody who's an employer who's installed these chargers, they say, well, it's corporate responsibility. It looks good. And so then they go and they spend $20,000 and they install 6 chargers, and maybe their employees are asking for it, but then they find that the 6 chargers that they installed, all of a sudden they're totally full. They have the same number of employees one day, and then all of a sudden it's full. So that begs the question is, well, how many chargers do you need? And this is kind of the entree into it. So there's employee retention. Employees, they request, we find a market pull for chargers. People go to their management and they say, I would like a charger. Why don't you have charging? Are you guys trying to ruin the earth? Please provide this charging. This is another benefit is you can get employees to work faster because let's say they had a leaf that would provide, if you enable them to have a leaf, they could potentially get to work faster through HOV lane access. And you can encourage vehicle sales. If companies, if they care about vehicle sales, then this providing charging work does provide some incentive for people to buy vehicles. So one of the often missed reasons is providing marginal electric miles. So miles that people would not do, they could plug in at home. Many people could plug in at home, get to work, and then get back. In that example I gave in the beginning where 6 people showed up one day and they didn't all just buy cars. They just started charging at work, not necessarily that they got more miles. So this is the, I think pricing separates the people who actually need it, and when you price it, you end up with marginal electric miles. And it really is a choice. I mean, if you are a workplace, you can decide to provide it free, or you can decide to provide it free at first and then pay over time. And it's really your choice, but it does make a difference in how many chargers you'll need to make congestion go away. So here's the survey. It's 11 states plus DC, and then we also put California in there. That was the 2013 survey. This other survey is December 2014 for these other states. And I think it's interesting to see if California is similar to other states. So how many people commute with a PEV? So we see that actually the rates of commuting are fairly consistent across all different states. And I didn't put the number of people answering on here, but I guess people in Florida don't commute as much with their plug-in. And I don't know, maybe that's the demographics down there that maybe they're retired, but they don't commute. But that's the only one that's mostly different. And less than half charge at work. So is workplace charging available? This is important for 2 reasons. One is no, people will buy the car even without workplace charging being available, so that's 60% of the top. Those people did buy without workplace charging being an incentive. But among those blue, the other thing is it's fairly consistent, about 40% I'd say across different regions. But there are people in there who probably did buy the car because of workplace charging. But this gives a general overview of do we need more, and the answer is yes. So how much is free? 75 to 80% of charging is free, and this does vary a little bit more from state to state, but it does seem to hover around 75 to 80%. And this is the current charging landscape, and it explains some of the results that you see as far as congestion. So this one, I think it's a little bit out of order, but we asked about the number of chargers per car, and it's kind of an eye chart. I'm not going to explain it too much, but if you see that line in the middle from 0.7 to 0.4, that means 1 charger for every car. So there's like 2 cars at a workplace and 2 chargers at a workplace. That exactly matches. All the people below, there's fewer chargers than vehicles, so 2 chargers, 10 vehicles would be down there. If you look at the charges per vehicle, 0.2, that's 2 chargers for every 10 vehicles. And then above, there's more chargers than there are people to use them. And so there would be no congestion on the top, no congestion in the middle, but there's a potential for congestion on the bottom end. So what do people report about congestion? We see that people say on an occasional basis, maybe like once a week. In California, congestion is slightly higher than other places. So a little over 30% have congestion once per day. And if, let's say, imagine you are a BEV and you are depending on this to actually get back home. Would you actually take your car once per week, or even on an occasional basis, you weren't sure you were able to get back home? And so the only people using the chargers are ones who are either PHEVs who they can chance it and go back on gas, or they have a i3 Rex. or the BEVs that actually don't need it. So they are able to make a round trip from home to work. Those are the ones you see who charge when it's congested. So over 30% of drivers, this is in California. I'll go a little bit more into this because we have a little more data. So pay systems exist in the congested area, even though, and it seems like pay systems, they are a response to this congestion problem. And so even though those places that are paid are the congested areas, you are 1.7 times less likely to experience congestion. And then we looked at those, just those chargers which were uncongested, or people said there was no congestion at their chargers, so we know we can actually see how many people don't need a charge. So at least 53% of people who don't need charging charge anyway, looking at their battery state of charge. And so this matches with what people say. Oh, and then this is just a news article, Charge Rage. It's actually a thing where people are managing chargers at work, and it's one of these issues people are trying to work out. So negative effects, increases uncertainty. I've kind of gone through this. But also I think it can create a hassle for companies to manage. And it's got to be somebody's job to manage charger slots or whatever. So this is the location of paid charging. This is the California survey. And you can see actually the areas in San Jose are the areas where you end up with more workplace charging that's paid. And you can see in, this could be in San Diego, this could be a result of the EV project where there's a lot of chargers that were, I think, $1 per hour, $2 per hour, and that could be kind of a vestigial effect of that and the ability to have telematics and actually charge versus chargers that don't have any sort of capability. But you see that this is, a lot of charging is free, and it really is kind of area specific. And you see the congestion happens in the same places, very similar places where there is charging. So this is a response to congestion is the pay systems. So we asked people, and I guess this was supposed to show up on an animated slide, but if you guys can just focus on the Prius on the side here, we said if it's free, how many times would you plug in assuming it's uncongested? And so a plug-in Prius, 80% of people would plug in 4+ times per week if it's free. But if it were equal to the price of home electricity, then they would plug in less. And then if it were double the price of home, and at this point in the survey, this was about the price parity with gasoline, they would plug in even less. So you see it goes from 80% plugging in 5 times a week to maybe 15% plugging in 5 times a week. So when you ask how many chargers do you need, I say what price. But very interestingly, when you look at the paid, who actually would pay for charging? And it's actually it's mostly Volt customers, some plug-in Prius owners, but you see Leaf owners. This is a very important indication that reliability or an availability of charging is very important. So once a week they might have longer trips from work, and they need to be able to depend on this from time to time. So most of their commute to and from work is covered, is kind of what it seems to me, but sometimes they need access to this charging at work. So you see this big red area, which you don't see in the plug-in hybrid situation. And so what does this mean as far as those 3 red boxes are reproduced here, and you can see that kind of side by side when you charge double the price as home electricity, which is slightly cheaper than gas for most people. And then how many chargers would you need per vehicle? So you see for every 100 people who go to work in a Volt, 12 will need charging. Actually, 24 will need charging, and then the number of chargers you need would be 12, assuming people charge twice per day. And then this is, so we use this in our models to estimate at different prices how many chargers we need. So It's about one charger for every 10 vehicles if people charge twice a day and it's paid. So one thing to kind of to keep an eye on, though, and we know this all changes, and this is why we put in our model different things you can change in prevalence of charging and such, is that when gasoline price goes down, sometimes PHEVs actually look better. And so you can't charge too much. There's a limit to what you can charge for electricity, and that I think what that is, especially for PHEVs, is what is the break-even cost of gasoline. So if we say gasoline is $2.80, the break-even cost for a plug-in Prius is 16 cents a kilowatt hour. And so I think it's even lower than $2.80 in many places. We're about $3 now, right? And so if you looked at the $3 line, that would be for the plug-in Prius. Your break-even cost would be maybe like 18 cents. And so you really have a cap on what you can charge for plug-in hybrids on a per kilowatt hour basis. And this does change based on the gasoline efficiency of your other, so the Volt is not as efficient on gas, and so you could charge a higher price and they would still be incentivized to plug in. But you do have a cap for how much you can charge for electricity, and you're probably not going to make money. The point is you're not going to make money with charging for charging work. It's more of a congestion management tool. So we have some in-use data from ChargePoint, and we focused on the workplace. And there was a few places that they were free, and then they changed the pricing policy to be paid. And so what happens in that moment when before you had a bunch of cars and they were all charging when it was free, and then the next day, who keeps showing up? And so it's very interesting to see in terms of the percent of range. And so I split this into PHEVs and BEVs. So let's look at the PHEV first. The free is the red line. And so most people were only at about 28% of their range when it was free. And so people, they plugged in, they might not have needed it, and so they could have gotten back home is the point. So if it goes past 0.5, these are the people who cannot get back home on electricity. That's the point. The break even, the break line is probably 0.5 or maybe 0.4 if you think that the range estimates from EPA are not correct. Maybe it's 0.4 or it's cold or something. But you can see that the majority of people, they get home and back. When it's paid, that changes a bit, and you see a little bit more people charging because they're not going to make it back home. With PHEVs, it's a little different. There's a lot of travel kind of to and from other places along the way, and so we think that's a lot of what explains that. But if we look over here and we look at that, the 50% line, which is right about here, we see that people don't go past half their range. So again, this is early, and this is there's some cleanup that needs to go on here. But you see it spikes at around 20% of range. So if it was a 100-mile battery electric vehicle, it would be 20 miles away. So they could get there 20 miles, come back, and they would still have 60 miles of range in their 100-mile BEV, for example. If it's a Leaf, it would be slightly different miles. But what you see is nobody goes past 40% of their range. But when it changes to paid, availability increases, and that people are actually getting marginal electric miles on their vehicle. So this is one indication that, yes, people are willing to risk it if you increase availability and assurance that you're going to find a charger. So how to charge by hour, by kilowatt hour, and I'm not going to go around this too much, but if you have this red bar here is people who can charge fast. They can pull it down to 6.6 kilowatts. If you charge by hour, it's cheaper than gas, but if you charge by hour on cars that are very slow, you see a drop-off in PHEVs. So if you charge by hour, PHEVs aren't going to charge as much at work. And again, this is kind of early, so take it for what it's worth now as early work. But if you see, if you charge by kilowatt hour, you see that the PHEVs are much more likely to want to charge because it's a fair price. Most of the people here were paying 14 cents per kilowatt hour, and that created this distribution. So again, we try to put all this in our models. This sensitivity to price, because it is such a big decision as you install chargers, and it makes such a big decision on how many people are going to be charging and need charging. We put this into our model, so we say it's free, same as home, or double the price of home, or some place that's less than gas, and people would charge at home to the maximum they could. So with that, I think we'll open it up for conclusions continued. Pricing by hour and by kilowatt hour has two different effects on PHEVs. And BEVs, increasing availability for BEVs appears to have people taking more risks with their BEVs, and you get more electric miles. So those people who actually travel 50 miles to work might actually do it if you increase availability of charging. You can increase availability of charging through pricing or just increasing more chargers. But you have to know how many people will show up at different prices. All right. And then what about sales? As Gil alluded to, this actually, charging for charging could have an effect on sales. And do we know that people would not buy the car? Is this such a big incentive that we want to keep going on this to increase the market? And we don't know if it's just the availability of workplace charging or it's the free price of workplace charging that drives some of these numbers. But we see, as Gil said, the Ford Fusion Energy and C-Max, those cars with 20-mile electric ranges, which matches a lot to average commutes, it is the most important because they can't get back on electricity without charging at work. And so it's less important for the Model S. Again, it goes from 3 to -3 for not at all important. But you see, interestingly, the Leaf is not as important as the Fusion. A lot of people can actually get to work and back, and it's not like they would depend on it as much. So with that, I think let's unmute the phone and maybe we'll take a couple questions.
The conference has been unmuted.
Any questions in the room? Yeah, of course.
How much are we learning about the driver's actual awareness of, one, that the price of electricity, either at home or at work? And then number two, how much are we tracking that people really know what they have on the car?
That's a great question, and I think we have indications that people, they know nothing about at least their home price of electricity. We're asking, what's your price per kilowatt hour, and most people don't really know. I think that they do some very rough calculations, so they know generally how many extra dollars they pay in their utility bill. Like, it used to be $40. Now I'm paying like $70. So $30 must be about what I'm paying. The price to fill up my car is about this much, and so I think it's cheaper. So there's that sort of, but as far as like the pricing at work, there are people who do the calculations, but I'd say the majority don't.
So the danger, in a way, when looking at these results is the pricing mechanism that you see could imply a level of awareness that actually doesn't exist.
Well, that's why we put some very easy reference points. If they think they're saving money at home, that's the break point, is home. Equal to home, less than home, or free, those are pretty easy. It's like, I think I'm saving money at home, therefore I'm going to transfer that to this, and then something above home. And so that last one is the one that I'm less sure of, but I think the other two break points, we basically want to see, do people switch from home to work? It was the main goal.
Less than cents and dollars. More than home or less.
Yeah. So you're right. We don't think people know exactly the cents. We've kind of calculated it afterwards. Any questions on the phone?
Cliff here. I have two questions. One is, did you take in consideration if owners of charging stations are allowed to charge for kilowatt hours, so for energy, or only for time? And secondly, if you charge for time, where do we see the correlation with getting people off fast chargers? Because there is certainly a point to make that you only give them 30 minutes for lower price charging to get them off after 30 minutes to get the resources available again.
So this was that's a good question. We didn't look at how many people could charge and not charge by kilowatt hour. Some people can, and we're just looking at the ones who did. So yeah, this is the observed results. So the second question.
Substitute for DC fast.
Oh, substituting DC fast for level 2?
And that was mainly for DC fast charging.
Okay, so the question is for DC fast charging, charged by kilowatt hour or by time?
Yes, because if you do by time, then I guess that you get people off the charger after 30 minutes when they reach their 80% state of charge, instead of having them sitting for 2 hours there and not doing anything.
Yeah, I think that's actually that's a great point, because it incentivizes people with slow chargers to clog up the charger. So that's a very interesting and very important thing. And I think there's different ways you can deal with it, such as you can charge by time and by kilowatt hour, and you can charge for actually sitting on the charger and not charging. So I would say that you have to incentivize to some degree to create availability by time, but it will have a certain effect. And I would say that as far as sitting on the charger for a long time, you probably could have a variable pricing scheme that says, okay, once you end your charge, then we're going to charge you double for the time that you're not charging, something like that. And I think you can even do that with ChargePoint.
Yeah.
But it's a very good point, and I'm more talking about the effects of what will happen if you do different things versus exactly how you're going to strategies to manage it.
What should you do? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I think the PHEV should have faster onboard chargers, and the more that you can, if you charge by hour, that will incentivize people to put faster chargers in their car or create some value for it. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's just what happens currently with onboard chargers.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Any more questions?
I've got one here.
Okay.
Beyond the straight commute home, have you looked at destinations post-work or extra trips that might explain the need for workplace charging?
Yes, that's a really good question. We did look at it once, and we found that I think it was like 17% of more miles were done on average on workplace trips in general. So yeah, there are extra trips that people do to and from work. It's a lot of times it's not a routine thing, and then I think that's what you see in the leaf data. Like that big red area is like, if every day were the same, people wouldn't need it just once a week, they would need it every day. And so I think we get an indication here of how many extra trips you need. And the other place I think you get the indication is on the PHEVs, who are willing to pay, even though they're only 20% of where they are at home, they're willing to pay for charging, which is, that means that their home charging is not enough. I think this whole blue line indicates when home charging is not enough, indicates the frequency with which people have these extra trips. And so that's a really good point. We don't have a complete answer, but 17 is the number. The best one I can give you. That's a very good question, though. Okay, since we'll just keep moving, I think
The conference has been muted.